Welcome to Creative in Tech, a podcast show powered by ReadSpeaker AI. I'm your host, Carrie Roberts, and I'm the brand evangelist for North America at ReadSpeaker. This show is all about highlighting various brands and organizations that are creatively using one of the fastest growing spaces in technology, conversational AI. And in these next few conversations, we're going to be chatting with people focusing in the banking and financial space and how that vertical is utilizing this technology in a creative way to innovate, improve, and grow their customer strategy. And joining me today, I have Emily Lonetto. She is the head of growth at VoiceFlow, and Rob Hayes, the head of product at VoiceFlow, a company helping teams design, prototype, and launch voice and chatbots. So welcome to both of you. So excited to have you here.
Thanks so much for having us.
Yeah, thank you.
So I want to start off just with each of you individually, because I think it's always nice to get to know the people we're talking to. And Emily, I'll start with you. What is it about the conversational AI space that really excites you and that you're passionate about?
I think one of the things that's really exciting about it is that it is this brand new interface. It is this brand new way that we're opening up all these new different opportunities for people to interact with technology, open up to generations that may have otherwise been forgotten in the past, or newer generations that are now picking those things up for the very first time. And there's this crazy opportunity for businesses and companies like ours as well to just discover that and create the standard for how people are going to be able to open up new experiences here, which I think is just like incredibly exciting from like a growth perspective, but also just from like a learning perspective.
Yeah, no, I agree. Rob, what about you? What is it that excites you about this space as a whole?
Yeah, it's probably the same answer, said a bit differently. I come from a bit of a design background, and for me, conversational interfaces just represent a whole new modality that people are going to be interacting with products and services that we're building, and it's really exciting because we're just on the forefront of that. It feels like, and then more and more of the products and services we're interacting with over the next 5 years, we're going to be using our voice, we're going to be using text, and it's just going to become a bigger and bigger part of our life. So it's exciting to be working in this field, really in what is early days.
Yeah, no, I agree. So we're talking again about this banking and financial space. And I'm curious from each of your standpoints, again, you could have different roles within your organization, but where do you see the banking and financial space going, or what has some of your research shown, or what are the things that you're hearing from people that are interacting or work in those spaces? Emily, I'll start with you on that.
Yeah, so I think that there's this overall change across all modalities of people wanting better access, instant access, optionality in terms of understanding what their options are with working, let's say, in finance, working in conjunction with the banks that they're registered with, or just performing tasks that are associated with that. And I think that what we're seeing is this demand both from the consumer side and also businesses trying to reinvent and think about how they can now offer things that are going to otherwise make them more competitive in the space, make them a master of user experience, which I think is something that's becoming a lot more expected from a user as they're diving into things. And I think what's exciting is that this is a historically it's a very historically large and very pre-existing, like colossal industry as is. So the stuff that they're working on right now is going to have a direct impact on millions of people from the get-go, and they'll have a lot of access to data that new industries might not be able to get in the same speed. So I think there's a lot going on there, both from the user side, from how companies are thinking about user experience, and then also from like perhaps a competitive side as they move forward in offering things that other people might not be able to just yet.
Yes, it is always about the user experience, always talking about, meeting people where they're at, having a variety of options, kind of keeping up with the demand of what people need, especially younger generations. So I agree. Rob, from your standpoint, you're a little bit more of a technical person. What have you kind of seen that people are maybe asking for or noticing, or where this space is going in terms of the banking and financial space?
Yeah, I think one of the bigger trends that we're seeing is a lot of financial institutions already have conversational experiences and have had so for the last tens of years, whether that's their IVR systems, their chat applications that they have running on websites. And so they already have these experiences, but they're very much siloed, or they're treated like different channels. And one of the kind of trends that we're seeing emerge is they're trying to unify the channels and the experiences into really a single assistant layer. And so any sort of conversational touch point you have is going, should act similarly, behave similarly. You should get the same level of service, have generally the same functionality available, and most importantly, the context about you as the customer should be carried across those experiences. And I think to be able to deliver that is a massive undertaking, because there's underlying technology systems and legacy there that makes it a really hard challenge. But financial institutions are really leading the way in trying to build that type of a cohesive conversational experience across any customer touch point.
And do either of you see, because you do chatbots and voice bots, do you see that these financial institutions are leaning towards more one than the other, or they're trying to do both at the same time? What have you been seeing as a whole? Rob, I'll ask you that question.
I think just by nature of what technologies they already have, chat is one of the existing channels, and there's a big opportunity for growth and growth, expansion, and just kind of general user experience improvement on that channel. So you see a lot of focus there, whereas voice assistants in particular would be more of an emerging platform for these institutions. But at the same time, many do have IVR systems that do fall within that voice bot kind of bucket that you define there. So they're investing in both sides, but more so when you're thinking about voice assistants in the vein of what you find on like a consumer assistant, Alexa and Google. That's more of a new project for them versus taking an existing platform that they already have and improving it. So they're really focusing on kind of improving what they have before expansion.
Yeah, and I'm going to have, Rob, if you can, your mic is a little bit low, just to check. So while you're doing that, Emily, I just want to comment, because you had talked about, there's been a little bit more on the chatbot side, and the voice bots are coming, but it's kind of pulled from IVR, which we've been hearing quite often, especially in these last conversations we have. Emily, can you talk a little bit about this kind of transition maybe from IVR using more conversational AI?
Yeah, so I think we were all familiar with the IVR breakdown, whether it's been us hopping on a phone call, waiting and listening to lobby music while playing and pressing various buttons. And I think that served its purpose as a router, as like a way of trying to create a triage system and connect people with support or certain actions. And I think like with that, the obvious trend in how they're set up is that they're very almost like a data tree of there's kind of an if this, then that flow as you're going through and filtering down. And where we're seeing kind of this change in terms of the AI side is it being a little bit more user driven, where a user may not want to or may not have an inquiry that falls directly within a predefined bracket, or may have, let's say, a sentence that can capture exactly what they're looking for, and it has multiple intents in it or has context within it that can skip a lot of those awkward kind of additional qualifying questions. And so I think in some ways we're seeing IVR open up this opportunity where people clearly want to interact that way and they want that option, but they also want it to be a little bit more of a user-driven experience versus a platform-driven experience. So I think that's definitely like one element of it. And I think the other side, to Rob's point, is also this idea of like learning, customizing, and carrying that information from the user experience, where some banks you might have seen where they have voice recognition they ask you a few qualifying questions at the beginning, so you don't need to go run and grab your card every single time and do the same input for authentication. So like that's one example of it. Or other ones where you can train based on some basic, let's say, initial conversations with the user, and now get a general profile of, okay, this person falls within like business. And therefore, every time they call from this number, it's probably going to be about their business account. So I think those elements are also helping to just provide a better context around each one of the contacts and how they interact with those systems.
Yeah, and your platform, you kind of split it into three, where you say it can be for designers, teams, or developers, so that people can kind of do it maybe internal or in-house, or again, they could work with an external partner as well and work with this. Can you kind of talk about those kind of three different options, Rob, in terms of how a designer, a team, or developer could potentially use your platform?
Yeah, certainly. So the platform itself, it really has a heavy focus on design, prototyping, and being able to hand off to build any of the conversational experiences that are built there. So a lot of the tooling itself supports the design workflow, but as part of that design workflow, you're not doing that in a bubble. And so, often every designer is working as part of a team, or they have stakeholders that they're interacting with, and they need to bring those members into the project's workflow, whether that's early on for maybe some high-level feedback on the flow, or later on when they do have something designed out and ready for testing, and they just want to be able to do some user testing on this. So we've got a lot of tooling and functionality that supports handling that team workflow. And then the next kind of step in the project's lifecycle is generally to get it into development. And so that's where the developer's role really comes into play, and some of the tooling that we've got to support developers, whether that's just getting artifacts out of our platform that inform their work, or actually being able to leverage some of our APIs and SDKs to build on top of for actually getting these things into production.
Can you share with us maybe some use cases, whatever you're allowed to or comfortable to share with, from a banking or finance perspective, of how someone has used conversational AI, what the problem was, what they created, and if it's been around long enough, any type of feedback that you've heard from the people interacting with it?
Yeah, certainly. So I think the kind of bucket of functionality that is a great starting point is there's a lot of just like general FAQ, Q&A type of support that is often buried somewhere else online, and it's just it's a great mechanism to surface that up. And so that's kind of the foundation of every one of these experiences we've seen. But then on top of that, then you start to layer some of the functions that can be done through a single voice command that might necessarily take 10 clicks somewhere else on the website. And so they're starting to use these conversational experiences as just a faster means to an end for what could be handled in their online banking functions, whether that's sending a transfer, or exchanging money between accounts, setting up new accounts, items like that. It really just kind of provides a faster means to that end for users who would prefer to do that through chat or voice than clicking around on the screen.
Yeah, I think that brings a good point, because it's funny, sometimes people think like, oh, conversational AI has to be this super sexy, fun experience. But a lot of times it's very operational. It's the stuff that people ask all the time, or the stuff that takes a lot longer to click through, and can make things more efficient and create a better customer experience. Emily, can you speak to that at all?
Yeah, I think that you hit it on the nail there. There's the creative paths that I think a lot of people ideate on and love talking about. Then there's the not sexy things that just save a lot of time. They're otherwise headaches. And I think that there's a lot of instances where we're now seeing voice as a modality as a good or a faster input, and that will help to skip through a bunch of, let's say, otherwise 10 clicks to get to a checking balance, or maybe you forgot your password, or you want to check up on a status on something and you don't want to pull out your phone, open up the app, log in, authenticate with your face, and you're wearing a mask and it doesn't work now. And there's all of those elements where I think that it's opening up these different ways of us thinking about, okay, maybe this isn't the best use of either the platform or the person's time. And I think like those ones are going to be really, really great adoption use cases of, I think, really good, quick actions that are going to be just easier habits for people to now map over to this modality versus others. And I think that will ultimately end up opening up more opportunities in the future for us to now take one step further beyond, okay, what are you comfortable with? What is possible? In the same way that mobile forced us to rethink using a different screen size, a different way of getting feedback, like haptic, for instance. And we're still on the cusp of that. And I think like that's what's really exciting is the companies that are using this as a gateway, now expanding a little bit further, and then we'll ultimately end up winning the race and getting to see these new opportunities arise.
Mhm.
Yeah. And, the other piece that I like to talk about too is, to really, you start small and then you kind of grow, as you just mentioned. But there are ways to make it really robust and create a full experience with things like sonic branding, with things like text to speech or customized voices or various sounds or just more interactive. Rob, I'll ask you, how do those things kind of play into all of this when you're talking about creating any type of voice spot?
Yeah, I think it kind of goes back to an earlier point, just about having consistency across channels. You're trying to create a familiar experience at every single touch point that feels like it represents the brand. And I think the TTS voices used, sonic branding that's used throughout the experience. It is your, as is in the name, it's your branding of that interface. When you lose the visual modality, or you're working in conjunction with a visual modality, you need to have that element of the branding to the experience, and then it also just makes it more approachable, because it some nice visual audio feedbacks. It helps to like reduce the amount of, yes, I have heard what you said, at the end of every prompt, because you can just play a little ping that indicates to the user that you've heard what they've said. And so it helps to like start to reduce some of the clutter in the user experience that you have with a lot of voice interactions.
Yeah,
I like that. Emily, anything to add to that?
Yeah, like I think that in the banking side as well, like I've seen really good examples, even like I use Bank of America, and they have Erica across like all of their different modalities. Like I've never heard Erica's voice, but if I see Erica's name on any of their chatbots, I automatically associate it with like the same experience. And like it doesn't have to necessarily always rely on audio, always rely on text and audio, or kind of any of the combination of them all together. And I think that's what's interesting, but also difficult for companies to think about, is now when we think about these types of multimodal experiences, whether it's chat and visual voice chat, whatever all of them are together, you have to design them to be cohesive as a whole and connected to each other, but also just as understandable and recognizable separately. And I think that there is a huge opportunity for people to really kind of think through those things in the same way that like when we think about brands like Progressive, and we automatically picture Flo and what she looks like and what she sounds like, and that's across all of their things, in the same way that if an iPhone goes off in a movie, we all react the same way. So there's companies that are going to be able to do that with their pings, with their sonic branding, or even just naming what their actual assistant is.
Yeah, I didn't even think, when you just mentioned that about like if you're in a movie theater and you all hear the sound and everyone looks at their iPhone, there's also this kind of element of this like psychological habit that can start to happen that adds to it as well. So I think that's a really good point. What would you say, if you're talking to potential clients or people in the banking and finance space, what do you hear is either the biggest concern or the biggest question or the reason that they're not doing voice yet? Rob, what would you say?
In the financial industry, or banking and financial industry, there's the security and privacy of information is always a concern, no matter what modality you're designing for. I think just because of the nature of some of this technology being relatively new, or just new to the teams that are adopting them, they're still working through a lot of the privacy concerns to get the organization comfortable with them. And so that's always a challenge. And then, how do you communicate certain points of data if you need to get a user's password through a chat interface? Do you obfuscate the passwords when it's entered into the chat? Do you obfuscate it when it's put into the input fields? All of these additional layers of privacy concerns need to be designed into these user experiences. And so that's just, it's not an unsolvable challenge. It's just a new layer to kind of a similar problem that anyone working in banking and finance products has dealt with for the last years, tens of years.
Yeah, and I agree. Like you said, it's not an unsolvable problem. That's an important point. It's a concern, and you're saying we know how to fix that. And it's just like everything else you've done. It's creating that plan and that journey and taking the time to do that. Anything to add to that, Emily?
Yeah, like I think that like Rob brings up, like this is always going to be something that like has to be perfect when they roll it out. Like the security has to be there always. I think that the other way of looking at it is there are a lot of companies that are still in like that proof of concept phase of thinking about, okay, how do we not just take this chatbot and just shove it into voice and hope that it works in the same way? How do we not just take our pre-existing, let's say support FAQ page and just shove it all into into a different modality? And so I think that there's definitely a lot of testing still going on, a lot of like writing what the standards are for what these bots look like or what they can serve. And I think in the same way that like the chat bot for the financial industry previously was like a repurposed support page or FAQ CMS, it's now evolving into, okay, it can do that, but also like certain actions that don't require like human interception. And I think voice is still in that POC phase of a lot of banks figuring out, okay, what will be better on this, or what should we restrict, and perhaps ask them to open up their phone in conjunction with this instead.
Which again, you make a good point there too, and you're saying it's not just doing something that's just voice or on chat. You might have to do something where it combines your phone or it combines something else, or it starts you one place and leads you to another, which is the term we always use here, which is omnichannel, right? And thinking about this in a more robust and larger way. Can you talk a little bit about that, Rob, in terms of how to allow voice to be omnichannel and how it fits into everything else that a bank or financial institution is doing and creating?
Yeah, I think that's one of the biggest challenges when you're jumping into designing for voice as a modality for the first time, is understanding that it's not great at everything, and it's never going to be. So you really have to design the voice customer journey as a layer on the existing customer journey, or the customer journey that exists for all of your other modalities and channels, and see where does it do a better job at performing some tasks or helping user get to an outcome that they want, and where does, quite frankly, it do a worse job, and make sure that user experience plays nicely with the channels that you do have that do a good job for that. If you're applying for a mortgage, there is a certain volume of information you need to provide a bank to make that happen. You probably don't want to spend 30 minutes talking to your speaker, trying to get all that information inputted correctly, verifying all that info. So, it's understanding where is voice actually additive for the user, and where wouldn't it be, and just making sure that you have those natural handoffs built into the UX.
Yes. I mean, it's like anything else. You don't want to do something just to do it. It has to be the right purpose for it. You've given a lot of thoughts and advice here, but Emily, I'll start with you. Any kind of like maybe one tip that you would give a banking financial institution that's either considering this, or maybe they've started with voice, but they're not really sure to go next. Any words of advice for something that they should be doing now?
Yeah, so I think that this is actually like a rephrasing that I had in conversation like last week that I think really made me rethink how you can even like place the context of your experience before you even start building. And I would say like my best piece of advice right now is like storyboard the user experience, not just like what is being said in the chat or like what are the potential responses, but like where are they? When do they normally ask those questions? Like, is this going to be served where they're at home and it's late at night, so there's like, they can't call in and talk to somebody? Is this going to be them on the run, or let's say potentially in conjunction with other things that they're doing? And I would say like map that out and try to see where that pre-exists with what are the expectations right now from how the user wants to perform those actions. So if you historically only serve people in-house and they wait in line and they talk to one of 3 tellers, how does this experience layer on top of that? How can it habit map from that? And storyboards are a wickedly visual and easy artifact to get a lot of people in line on right from the get-go.
I like that. I had a conversational designer tell me a while ago that she actually acts it out. Like they have a script that they read and they like, they kind of create this set. I'm a dancer. And I was like, oh, I love this. Like so much creativity. I think people forget, yes, it's technology, but there's a lot of creative elements that go into this. And that's a perfect example of what you just said about storyboarding. Rob, any other ideas or tips to add here, either on top of what Emily's saying or just in general for banking and finance institution in terms of what should I be doing for voice or next steps?
Yeah, I think it's actually a build on what Emily's saying there. Just from what we've heard where people have found success, it's really about creating tangible artifacts that are able to communicate that experience. And so when you're early days storyboarding, it's amazing because it starts to make it tangible, what that end user experience. And you just want to be able to continue that throughout the product development lifecycle that you've got. And conversational experiences are a little bit harder to for somebody to kind of pick up and conceptualize what that's actually going to be like if you're just handing them a flowchart on paper or a list of here's interactions, prompts and responses that we'd have in an exchange with the customer. So being able to prototype that in whatever level of fidelity is the thing that makes the work engaging. It's the thing that gets stakeholders interested in, engaged with the projects that are being done. It gives you tangible feedback when you get them in front of users. And so it's just the more you can bring your work to life, the more you can make it tangible. That's really been one of the major patterns from the successful customers we've seen in this space.
Yeah, no, I love that. If people want to learn more about anything we spoke about or they want to connect with either of you, where is the best place to do that? Emily, I'll have you go first.
Yeah, so we're super responsive on Twitter, or you can also jump into our community. We're all there. And you can find our community at bit.ly/VF community, or Twitter, you can find us at VoiceFlow HQ. And if you want to connect with either Rob or I, we're also on there on Twitter. I'm at Emily Lonetto, and I'll leave Rob to go with his Twitter plug.
The Rob Hayes, TheRobHayes.
Oh, that you got in early then with that name. That's perfect.
When I saw P. Diddy do it, I had to follow that structure.
So great. Well, thank you both. I appreciate you being on and really sharing some great insights and some kind of actionable steps that especially banks and financial institutions, but across all verticals can take as well. So thank you so much for being here.
Thanks so much for having us.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
And if you are watching or listening, don't forget to subscribe to our ReadSpeaker AI YouTube page, as well as check out our podcast called Creative in Tech, wherever you listen to podcasts.